everyone, and welcome to our event celebrating the life and the legacy of Henri Nouwen. We have people who have joined us from the US, from Canada, from the UK, from Ireland, and from all around the globe. So wherever you are in the world right now, whether it's afternoon, like it is here in North America, or later on this evening, or maybe tomorrow morning already, we're really happy to have you with us. I'm Therese Ratliff, the publisher of books and devotionals at Bayard in the United States. And today we are very pleased to be launching our book from 23rd Publications in the US and from Novalis Publishing in Canada, On Retreat with Henri Nouwen, Engaging Life's Big Questions. As most of you who are on this call know, this past September 21st, 2021 marks the 25th anniversary of Henri's death in 1996. 2 years ago, we began a conversation with the Henri Nouwen Society around what we might do together to celebrate the gift to the world that was Henri. And our book and our book launch is just one of the fruits of that collaboration. Today, we have with us seasoned authors Chris Pritchett and Marjorie Thompson, who will share insights and inspirations on the big questions that were ever present for Henri on his spiritual journey and that still challenge many of us today. And anchoring our conversation is Karen Pascal, the executive director of the Henri Nouwen Society. Having these three together in conversation around topics that matter to Henri and that still matter to us is a real blessing. And so to get us started, I'll turn the conversation over to Karen. Enjoy, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome from the Henri Nouwen Society and from the Henri Nouwen Legacy Trust. We have really enjoyed this partnership with Bayard Books and Devotionals and with Novalis Publishing in Canada. Some wonderful things have been born out of it. I know at the heart of it was this vision that somehow we would equip people with the tools for spiritual formation, for personal growth, and something that they could take and have a personal retreat or retreats in small groups. It's a really good book we're launching today, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. I first of all want to tell you a little bit about our writers. They are wonderful people. Both of them are part of the Henri Nouwen Legacy Trust and the Henri Nouwen Society. I'd like to introduce, first of all, Marjorie Thompson. Marjorie Thompson actually and Chris Pritchett are the co-authors of On Retreat with Henri Nouwen, Engaging Life's Big Questions. Let me tell you a bit about Marjorie. She has enjoyed 35 years of ministry in retreat work, spiritual guidance, teaching, and writing. Author of the best-selling book, Soul Feast, An Invitation to the Christian Spiritual Life. She considers writing central to her calling as a Presbyterian minister. Recent books include Forgiveness, a Lenten Study, and Courage for Caregivers, Sustenance for the Journey and Company of Henri Nouwen. For 12 years, Marjorie served Upper Room Ministries in Nashville as Director of Pathways and Congregational Spirituality. There, she developed Companions in Christ, an innovative small group series fostering adult spiritual formation. Marjorie is also a prepared facilitator for Circles of Trust, retreats through the Center of Courage and Renewal that was founded by Parker Palmer. And of course, Parker is a very important friend and mentor to Marjorie. She served 2 congregations as pastoral ministry and as adjunct faculty for several seminaries. Marjorie's extensive training in retreat ministry has been a great enrichment to the book we're launching today. And Marjorie is a Presbyterian minister. That just gives you a little bit of a picture. She lives in Nashville, Tennessee, and as I said, she's on the board of the Henri Nouwen Society. Now I want to introduce you to Reverend Dr. Chris Pritchett. He's a native of Southern California. Oops, I think I just lost what I'm looking for here. Forgive me. He's a native of Southern California, but he's now living in Salt Lake City, Utah, where he's the pastor of a church called Mount Olympus Presbyterian Church in Salt Lake City, Utah. Just going to go back here and find my notes. He got his undergraduate degree at Westmount College in Santa Barbara, where he met his wife, Devin. And Chris went on to get his Master of Divinity degree from Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena. He's also completed a Master of Theology in Preaching, a degree from Princeton Theological Seminary, and Chris has just completed his studies for his doctorate of ministry degree at George Fox University in Oregon. Devin and Chris have 3 children, Hannah, Abby, and Lucas. As I said, he is also on our board, and it is really a pleasure for us to have these 2. In fact, Chris was kind of where we started with the book, in that Chris, he had actually written a beautiful devotional, and when they were looking for writers, I said, well, I have one that I might like to suggest to you. So they took a look and they said, let's start here, and that's where the book started. So I thank you for this. Let's go on, and I'd like to ask some questions now. And Marjorie, I think I'm going to start with you. I would like to just ask you, Henri wrote 39 books, and obviously many books have been written since he passed away 25 years ago. I want to ask you really, how is this book, On Retreat with Henri Nouwen, unique? What makes this distinctive and important for our times?
Well, that's a wonderful question, Karen. Thank you. And I also would like to just welcome and acknowledge all of you who are present for this launch. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be here and to have been part of the development of this book. I think it is distinctive in a couple of ways. First of all, the 5 questions. These particular 5 questions are some of the most profound and persistent questions in human life. I would say they really get to existential questions. And there's really no place. Henri wrote so many books and wrote around particular themes, but there's no place where these particular critical existential questions are addressed in one place. So, and I think we'll have a chance to go more into these questions, but just very briefly, they're questions around human identity, our identity, questions around who God really is, what God is truly like, the authentic nature of love, and in relation to a loving God, how do we understand suffering? How do we live our suffering in a way that might be fruitful? And then how do we find freedom? What does freedom even mean, particularly in a time of immense anxiety, and we certainly live in such a time. I think these questions are so central that it's valuable to bring them together in one book. Part of the beauty of this book is it gave Chris and me as authors, and of course with the help of Stephen Lazarus, who's such a wonderful scholar on all of Henri's books, gave us a chance to sort through of Henri's books and really cull out Henri's wisdom, his lived wisdom on these big questions, and kind of put it all into one place. So I think that's one element of the distinctiveness of this book. And the other element I would point to is that the structure of the book serves the purpose of retreat. I mean, this book is titled On Retreat with Henri Nouwen. And our hope, our purpose is to give the reader a chance to be on retreat with Henri as the spiritual guide in relation to these really big, important questions. So the book is structured not only with the chapter content around these themes, but with really helpful reflection questions at the end of each chapter, multiple questions, clusters of questions really, so that the reader can select those questions that they feel particularly drawn to, that might be most fruitful to work with in relation to their own life. And that's where this becomes like a retreat. You know, there's the tradition of a preached retreat where there are chunks of content and then time for the retreatants to go off in solitude and to pray and ponder and perhaps work with scripture texts or do journaling. And journaling is a really important part of this too. I can say more about that, but here I would just say that the structure of the chapters with the reflection questions at the end and then following those questions, which are really prompts to journaling and self-examination, self-awareness, maybe self-compassion or gratitude, those kinds of things. There are beyond the questions something we're calling spiritual exercises and prayerful actions. That's where the reader has a chance to move into retreat mode and ask, how does this connect with my life? It's not accidental. I think that the subtitle of this book is Engaging Life's Big Questions. So we draw together ways in which Henri engaged the questions. And we engage them in some measure as authors with parts of our own stories. And then we invite the readers to engage these deep questions in their own lives as they ponder and reflect on this. So between the 5 questions and the retreat structure, I think this is a very uniquely valuable book.
There's a timeliness to this book as well, which I think is really interesting. Teresa and I talked about the fact that it started 2.5 years ago, long before there was a pandemic on the horizon. But I feel there's a timeliness in the content. Chris, I loved that it says insights from a spiritual master. We've been careful using that term, spiritual master. I think we kind of just entered into it in this 25th anniversary, to be honest with you. But I want to hear from you what you feel Henri has to offer to this moment that we are living through. How does this book speak to our world? And how does it match our moment?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And I also want to just echo what Marjorie said, just to welcome each and every one of you who are watching and participating in this today. I'm deeply honored to hear about how many places, from how many places people are gathered. And so it feels like a really big honor to share in this time, just as it was a really great honor and challenge to write this book with Marjorie and to share in that project with Therese and Karen. So to answer your question, well, these questions, these 5 sort of questions, essentially, who am I? How do I connect with God? How do I relate to God? How do I know God? How do I understand love? How do I understand my own suffering in my life that I experience? And how do I find freedom as well? These are, as you mentioned, these are existential questions that essentially kind of make up the geography of the inner life. And it is fascinating that Henri did not write directly on these, 5 big themes or questions, existential questions, directly as one solid book in the way that we have done. But he has written about these topics and themes in so many different books and articles and writings. It was an incredible blessing to have Stephen Lazarus assisting us with the research, because we've sifted through a multitude of materials from the archives, and there's so much there. And we tried to draw out some of Henri's reflections on these questions as they come to bear on our life and on our time, because they are timeless questions that make up the geography of the inner life. In some regards, they're appropriate for any time and in any place. We tried to, in our reflections and in our intersections with our own life, in our own story, we tried to see and draw out how they're in part appropriate and relevant for our time. And so, you know, Marjorie mentioned that we live in a time of great anxiety. There's no doubt about that. With the global pandemic that we all are aware of, with the effects of climate change and so many other challenges that we face, there is existential anxiety throughout the globe. We were not aware that the pandemic was coming when we set out to journey on this project. I think we have come to find that it's even more relevant than we thought in the beginning, because when you experience something like a global pandemic, it raises these existential questions. Why am I here? What does all of this matter? Who am I anyway? Am I just a little blip, that speck of dust? Or does my life matter? Is there really a God? And like Marjorie said, how can all of this suffering happen? How do I navigate through the own struggles and questions and experiences in my own life? And Henri brings a unique voice, I think, because of a couple of things. He was well trained in the best of modern psychology at the time, as well as academically credible theological formation. And he combined both of those formal training fields and integrated them with his own vulnerability and his own suffering and his own stories and his own search for God and relationship with God. And so it, in and of itself, his teaching offers a fuller pathway in a time of not only great anxiety, but also great confusion. Because we live in an age of anxiety, we also live in an age of information overload. We are constantly being bombarded with ideas, products, ways of life from so many different means and places and people, and it comes at us in so many different ways, and we don't really know who to trust or what to trust or how to navigate through the mess. And Henri's timeless truth, born out of both theological training but proven through his own experience, offers a helpful and constructive pathway through the muck and the muddle and the mire of our information overload. And then thirdly, I would just say that we also live in a time, because of social media, we have understood that we are more connected than we've ever been before. And many sociologists have also said that we are simultaneously more lonely as a people than we've ever have been. That's hard to measure, but the reality of loneliness and how social media creates that. And I have 3 teenagers at home, and the worry and concern around that effect on their lives is real. And Henri helps us to find a way to become who we are, to become present in our own selves, to find a deeper and stronger ground on which to place our feet. And all of that, of course, is rooted, as he would say, in the belovedness, as as who we are, and God's love for us that has come to us in Jesus, and his offer to be our friends. And so, so he offers these wonderful, timeless truths that they happen to be very critical for this day and age. He didn't know that, but we're experiencing that.
It's interesting from our perspective at the Henri Nouwen Society, we hear almost daily from people who are finding the words of Henri such a resource, such a gift into their lives as they face challenges. And I guess the thing that's so universal right now is you're experiencing what we're experiencing in Canada, in Washington, D.C., in the Netherlands, in New Zealand today. We're all facing something we didn't see coming, but something which has so fully impacted us. And yet there is this great wisdom. Henri has a lot to offer. Chris, I'm curious about how your relationship between your own life stories, your own stories, and the wisdom of Henri Nouwen, that the wisdom Henri Nouwen has to offer. In particular, I know that, for example, a book like In the Name of Jesus had a significant impact on shaping your work as a minister, and you were going through cancer and seminary at the time you read it. What was it like to write and weave some of your personal experiences into On Retreat with Henri Nouwen?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the story itself is quite important for my life. I mean, I was setting out on a trajectory of sort of achievement and entering into a pastoral ministry with strength and tools. And I had never been to a doctor before, hardly much in my life. And so all of the things that I sort of built up that I thought were going to be tools of success for me, and everything that I can bring to ministry, felt like it kind of came crashing down when I was very early in my vocation as a youth minister. And the very first day, actually, that I got my job, I learned that I had stage 3 testicular cancer and was going to go through a bunch of rounds of chemotherapy at City of Hope, and would have to take some time from my seminary studies to navigate that. And it was during that time that I read In the Name of Jesus, and I was thinking about what will be my philosophy of ministry. And he talks a lot about downward mobility, and how that is the way of Jesus, not the way of success or perfection or health or wellness or whatever, but the way of service and offering ourselves humbly, as Jesus did in his journey to the cross. And so it became a really profound book for me, that I was going to seek to resist some of the temptations he talks about, the temptation to be powerful, and the temptation to be relevant, and the temptation to be spectacular. And these are temptations that I think every minister and Christian leader, as well as really any Christian, has dealt with in their lives. And Henri offered just a really great foundation for how I could offer my experience through cancer. And by God's grace, I've been in remission for 16 years now. But that God would use this for to bless others, to help others, and that ministry isn't really about being relevant or being spectacular or being powerful, but it's about the life of Christ coming through our lives. And so he taught me so much about how my career, my work, is not nearly as much about technique as it is about who am I, and who is God in me, and how do I offer that to others faithfully.
I'm reminded, and it's one of those verses that challenges me, the comfort wherewith you've been comforted, you will comfort others. And there is in this beautiful book on retreat with Henri Nouwen, there's a lot of the comfort, Marjorie and Chris, you have had to draw on in your own lives. There's a ground level of truth in it, and I think people are going to be blessed. Marjorie, from your perspective, who's the book for? Who would you like to put it in their hands and just tell us a little bit more about this personal retreat? I'd love to hear from you about that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. I can think of all kinds of people who would benefit from a book like this. Anyone who's really struggling with some of these deep questions. I think of identity. We actually live in a time when identity questions are just coming forward left and right. I was thinking about this just earlier today, that we've got, I'm speaking now as a large context, globally, we have people very concerned about national identity, or people who are very deeply concerned about their ethnic identity, their political identity, or gender identity. We are talking about identity all the time, and those are important conversations. I think we're discovering a much broader range, a more diverse range of identities, and what it means to respect those identities and value them. But there's a tendency in the identity conversations to focus on what makes us different. And one of the things, this maybe comes back to the question about how Henri's work really speaks to our time and our moment in history, that one of his greatest gifts, I think, is to help us discover the deeper identity, the deepest identity that we have as human beings, as sons and daughters of the living God, as human beings made in the image and likeness of God. That is an identity, that's the deep identity, and it's the identity that joins us to all the rest of humanity. I mean, I think of how this pandemic has given us an opportunity to recognize our connectedness, how interdependent we are on one another, how much we need each other, how much we need community. And Henri just had such beautiful perspective on not only that deep identity, which was so valuable for him to discover in his own life, and has been so immensely helpful to so many of his readers and friends over the course of his lifetime. But he also focuses on our unity and on themes of communion and connection. Connection was so important to Henri. I think we live in a time when we've got to take very seriously how connected we really are, and how connected we are with one another, and how connected we are with the whole of creation. So that's, I guess I kind of went into all of that as a way of coming back to the question of how Henri addresses our time, but there are so many ways in which people are struggling with their identity in our time. And I think anyone who's struggling with identity issues could be helped by this book. Anyone who is really struggling with their image of God, who's in transition around how, how we understand God, how we see God in our lives, could be helped by this book. We live in a time when I think it's much more common now to focus on the love of God. Only, I would say, 100 years ago, or less in some cases, the focus was much more on the judgment of God and the wrath of God. And Henri has been one of the very important voices in helping us turn a corner to really focus on love as the heart of God's being, which thus means it needs to be the heart of who we are in relation to one another as well. So people who struggle with their understanding of God, people who are struggling with issues around suffering, personal suffering, and with how we face into anxiety. I mentioned that the whole final chapter is really on finding not just peace, but a sense of freedom, a deeper freedom to live our lives without being governed by anxiety. And I think, again, in ways we could not have anticipated when we started working on this material, we've been thrust into a period of almost 2 years now of intense anxiety around what's happening in relation to the pandemic and how the pandemic has impacted the economy and, where jobs have gone and people who have died in our lives, people we know and love. And the level of anxiety in our lives, I think, may be reflected in statistics we're hearing about now with the opioid epidemic. It's not just physical pain we're dealing with, it's emotional pain and mental pain. How do we cope with all of that? And this book, I think, really gives some very helpful perspectives and some helpful pathways forward in relation to our anxiety. There's so much comfort in Henri's writing, and it's available to us, and we've done our best, I think, to try to bring forward some elements of that.
I think the two of you have done an amazing job, and you are right to also credit Stephen Lazarus, who's woven through the pages of this as well, being a great resource to saying, what about this, what about that, because he has been so knowledgeable of Henri's writing overall. But the two of you have anchored it there, and without knowing that we were going to face this challenging time, you have given us a resource that I think is just full of life and wisdom. Henri wrote so honestly. I mean, that is, I think, what all of us love about his writing. I mean, there's this person who tells it how it is in his heart and what he's going through, but then he always turns it towards God. I was reading this little quote here from the Genesee Diary. Is there a still point where my life is anchored and from which I can reach out with hope and courage and confidence? And I think that may be the very question that we ask again. Is there an anchor in the midst of all that is changing around us, all the disruption? Chris, would you like to add a little bit to some of this thinking that we're sharing here? Because I'm anxious that people recognize we have a treasure we're offering with this book. It really is something special, and that they're going to receive something from it. What would you like them to receive, Chris?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think I would hope that they would receive first and foremost Henri's message of the love of God and the presence of God, the hope of God. I hope that as they engage the book and read not only Henri's reflections and teachings, but our reflections and intersections with their own stories, that they would be able to find our thoughts and stories to be kind of like portals into the reflection in their own life. I think that the book, it would be best served to be read slowly, and to be pondered. It was written slowly. Yeah. And you earlier asked, what was it like writing about some of these stories? Well, it was hard because it meant I had to go deep within my own experience and in my own inner life, to do that. And that would be the same, I would expect, for the reader who really wants to get the most out of the book, would be to read it slowly and to reflect on their own life and their own experiences through the reflections. And I hope that it would be helpful in that. We can often, and that's partly what makes Henri so helpful and accessible, is that he really goes deep into his own experience, his own story, his own suffering, his own hope and consolation and desolation. And in that, then we can find our own lives and our own stories, because it then goes wide from you.
I'm wondering, actually, if I might just piggyback a little bit, Chris, on what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm really struck by that particular quote. Is there a still point where my life is anchored? And that quote actually comes from Henri's Genesee diary, when he was entering into a 7-month period that in some sense was like an extended retreat for him, a time away from his very busy life of teaching and being available to students and faculty. And he understood that still point where his life was anchored in Christ was the place from which he could reach out with a sense of hope and courage, not only in his own life, but with others. And I think what strikes me about that is it's such a beautiful invitation to us to enter into our own retreat time, seeking the still point, that deep center, the image of being rooted and grounded in Christ from Ephesians really comes to mind for me. I think that working with a book like this can, working through it, really treating it as a retreat opportunity, taking time to journal with the questions and to work with the spiritual exercises, the reflective process where we ourselves engage these themes and find the connections with our own lived experience. That's where the fruitfulness comes in our own lives. But it's an opportunity to ground ourselves again, to find that still point, to get rooted and grounded in the love of Christ, that allows us to get a different perspective, a higher perspective, if you will, on the stresses and challenges and anxieties of life that we face. This is, no time in history has been without its stresses and anxieties and challenges. We have our own in this time, but this is, as you said earlier, Chris, Henri's work is both timeless and timely. Because it's really universal, and we bring it back into our own day and time now. I think the retreat gives us a chance to do that in a particular way for our time.
I'm curious if we have any questions that have come in, if people would like to ask a little bit about the book or ask about our two authors. If not, we will just carry on. I'm not seeing anything here, but I will double check that I'm not missing anything. Perhaps.
I see one here that says, if you were able to share a meal or have a drink with Henri, What would you like to ask him?
Oh, I love that. I love that. Why don't we start with you? What would you like to ask him, Chris?
Oh, well, I think I would like to ask him about his writing and how did he really become such how was he able to communicate so much? How could he, what are the practices? How did he develop his writing life? I think I would like to ask him to tell that story.
Now, Marjorie, you did have dinner with Henri. What would you be asking today? I mean, maybe you could just share a little bit about your relationship with Henri because you knew him personally. And then what might be the questions today that you would want to ask?
Oh, yeah. This is a very long time ago now, but I have shared meals with Henri and John, my late husband, who worked directly with Henri for 5 years. You know, I guess what comes to my mind is I would want to ask Henri now, because I fully believe Henri is, you know, with the saints in light, part of the great cloud of witnesses, that Henri's spirit is very much with us right now, even in this conversation and this time. I would love to ask him how he has experienced being caught by God the catcher. That's the image that, you know, he used in relation to the trapeze artists. That God is the catcher, and the flyer, the one who goes through the air and does all the tricks. Nothing works unless the catcher is there to pull you up, and it's that relationship of trust that makes it possible for the flyer to move freely. And it's the image that I use in the final chapter on anxiety and freedom. I would like to know more about how Henri himself experienced being caught. His experience of really learning to trust the catcher in his own life. Because I know that was a big struggle for him. So it's almost a question for him now, looking back on his life. How did he experience that? I'd love to have that conversation.
One of my favorite questions that was actually sent to Henri, and Gabrielle Earnshaw shared it when we were doing the documentary I did on Henri. And I've always loved this question. Someone wrote Henri and said, "How could you know the map of my heart?" And I think that really describes who Henri was as a writer. He somehow knew the map of our heart, but it was really because that which is most personal is most universal. And he was not afraid to share what was so personal to him. He didn't try to hide his doubts, his fears, his anxieties. And in that, we all get caught up and go, oh, okay. And he also was able to map them out in that big scale of, you know, how am I going to be successful? How am I going to be, you know, all those things that he basically acknowledged, and then invites us into a different kind of a dialogue, a different kind of a relationship. And Chris, as you and you, Marjorie, have pointed out, it is into our belovedness that he invites us. Let me just see. I'd like to ask Henri if he ever really dealt with his sexuality. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know, Marjorie, what would you say? I know that he was a man who was deeply honest and deeply committed to his vow of celibacy as a priest.
Yes, you know, I this is a question I think that we need to be able to deal with in our time. Henri never came out of the closet, so to speak, in his lifetime. And let me go back to what I was saying about identity. I remember having conversations with John about this, who knew Henri so well. and John's perspective was that Henri was, I would say, pressured by some of his gay friends and students to come out, and he did not. I think he knew at that time that it would be damaging to his own ministry. And the reason he didn't is because it was not the primary identity he wanted people to focus on. For Henri, his primary identity was a priest. That was his first love. Even as a child, he dressed up as a priest. There are pictures of Henri dressed up in his little priest outfit, and he would play with his friends and his brothers, and they would be his congregation. he would play priest. This was a deep calling in his life, and I think Henri always wanted that to remain at the center. I think he would say he would focus on that deepest of all identities because it is the one that we share in common as sons and daughters of a God, made in that image and likeness. And I don't think he wanted his sexual identity to distract from that. That would be my guess. Now, of course, I don't know this. This is an educated guess, I suppose. But based on my conversations with John, who knew him so well, I think that would be how I would understand it.
I found that in my knowing of him, that I've often said it was like he had a plumb line in his being, and it was Jesus. It was really interesting. It wasn't, he could go this way and that way, but he would come back to that. And that centrality in his being became the thing that bridged many denominations. I know lots of evangelicals thought, oh, he's one of us. He's an evangelical because Jesus was so central to him. It's interesting. But the bottom line is, I think you have to, if you read Henri, you have to look at what is central to him. And he was incredibly honest about that. And I would agree with you, Marjorie. I don't think that that was the central identity he wanted to pass on. I think it probably played a very important part in him discovering his belovedness, in receiving that he was loved. And once he understood that, that was the best he could give to others, I think. Any other comments? What would you say, Chris?
I just wonder if he would have the same approach today in today's world as he did then around that. Yeah. Maybe not. I think his focus is right, and the questioner mentioned that he really did suffer with this issue, and I think we have some indication that he did suffer some anguish, particularly around a friendship and whatnot. But I don't know exactly what the depth of his suffering around this issue was.
It's not something that we can deny, but we can honestly say there's a lot that we don't know. And Henri made choices, and we have to kind of respect the choices that he made, I think, at this point. Are there any other questions or little pieces that you would like to be sure to contribute, Marjorie and Chris, before we go back to Therese? I know I want to say to you that are listening, this is a very special book. I want to encourage you. I love it. On Retreat with Henri Nouwen, Engaging Life's Big Questions. You're going to find something very fresh, but also very deep. And it's beautifully laid out. The questions that will challenge you with each chapter will be those questions you need to be asking at this point in your life. So I highly recommend it. Is there anything else, Marjorie or Chris, you would like to add to the discussion? Otherwise, we'll give it back to Therese.
I would just want to encourage the readers to have an open heart and an open mind, and I hope that even for anybody who might be suffering around their own sexuality, that this book can even be hopeful in that regard, because I think Henry's
Absolutely.
teaching is.
It's valuable and important. And I appreciate the question. Therese, this has been an honor to work with you on this. You had a beautiful vision and it came together, and we so have enjoyed you as a publisher that in a sense have created some wonderful things, wonderful ways of celebrating this 25th anniversary. It was a privilege to see Marjorie and Chris team up. It didn't start in that configuration, but it worked out so beautifully that the two came together and brought together this very valuable tool, this very valuable book. We are so thankful for our publishers, and we encourage all of you to take advantage of this little discount that they are offering, not little, big 20% discount that they're offering. And I would encourage you, wherever you're coming in from, to reach out and enjoy the book. To you.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. It's been great hearing both Marjorie and Chris, hearing your answers, your thoughtfulness that went into this volume. We so have enjoyed working along with Karen and with you on this project. And I just wanted to address quickly one of the questions that did come up in the chat. Someone was asking if this needed to be kind of a one sit down and use this as a retreat, maybe taking a week for yourself as a retreat. You could certainly do that. But the beauty of this book is it doesn't need to be done in that fashion. It doesn't need to be read in one sitting. Each of these individual topics, which are one of the chapters in this book, are individual unto themselves. And so you can go through this book and pick out the topic that makes the most sense to you, the topic that speaks to you the most at this moment in your life, work with that chapter for as long as it takes you. You know, you can pause, you can read a little section. They're sectioned out with headings. You can do one at a time. Each of the chapters does end with a section that says in the next chapter. So there is a value in moving from the beginning, from that first chapter on identity, then to God, and then to love, and so on. There is a value to that, but there's no way restraint to do it that way. So you can certainly use this over a long, extended period of time, or if you're privileged to go away for a week, or you have a week's vacation or a week's sabbatical and you really want to dig into the whole book at that time, that's a great way to use it too. But there's a lot of variety in the ways that you can use this book. And so that's really, we really thank Marjorie and Chris for putting it together that way, so that people really on the go can use this in ways that make sense for their own situations.
Lovely.
So it looks like we've come to the end of our time together. And again, I just want to give a really big thank you to Karen, to Chris, to Marjorie, really for the amazing look at Henry's spiritual legacy and how this project can really be the springboard and the inspiration for making our own spiritual retreat. A retreat on your own, a retreat with a few friends, a retreat with even a larger, more formal retreat structure. A whole parish could use this as the basis for a parish mission and get a lot out of it. So there are many ways this can be used. You can obtain the book from 23rd Publications. I think you see it on your screen there now, in the US or around the world. You can obtain it from Novalis Publishing in Canada, from Canterbury Press in the UK and in English-speaking Europe, from St. Paul's in Australia, and there are also other language editions that are available around the world too. It is also available in an ebook format on Amazon and other platforms around the world. So wherever you get your ebook reading, you can get this there as well. So once again, I really hope you've enjoyed and been inspired by our conversation, and we hope to see you again at another online event sometime in the future. Thanks for being with us.